Before we dive into this story, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel, and trust me, you don't want to miss a single detail of what might be the most frustrating and preventable disaster in modern mountaineering history. Also, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from today. Now, buckle up, because this is not a typical tragedy of bad luck or a sudden storm. This is a story about something far more terrifying: absolute, unshakable arrogance. On the morning of May 14, 2021, a radio transmission crackled through the static at Kanchenjunga base camp. It was not a distress call. It was not a plea for help. It was a confirmation. Every single Sherpa on that mountain had seen it coming for 3 weeks. The voice on the other end belonged to Pemba Jelj, a lead guide who had spent the last 12 hours searching the upper slopes of the world's third highest peak. His words were cold, stripped of the usual morning tone that follows a death in the Himalayas. He simply said, "We found her. She is exactly where we told her she would be." That woman was Ingred Larson, 29 years old. She was found sitting upright at 8,200 meters, frozen into a posture that deceptively looked like rest. Her goggles were off, her gloves were missing, and her body was located 300 meters off the standard route, in a section of the mountain known as the Killer's Corridor, a zone of unstable seracs and avalanche chutes that local guides had explicitly declared a no-go zone just days earlier. Ingrid had not fallen. She had not been swept away by an avalanche. She had simply sat down and waited for the cold to take her. This was not a tragedy caused by bad luck or freak weather. It was caused by something far deadlier: absolute, unyielding arrogance. If you follow mountaineering, you know that people die in the death zone every season. Usually it is a tragedy of circumstance: a hidden crevasse, a sudden storm, a failed oxygen regulator. But the death of Ingrid Larson is different. It is perhaps the most frustrating, infuriating, and preventable loss of life recorded in modern Himalayan history. Because Ingrid did not just die. She actively fought against her own survival at every single turn. She ignored weather reports. She fired the guide who tried to save her life. She mocked local Sherpas on social media hours before her death. And she marched into a storm that everyone else was running from, convinced that the rules of physics and physiology did not apply to her. In this documentary, we are not going to look away from the ugly truth. We are going to dissect the anatomy of an ego that killed its owner. We will examine the timeline minute by minute, from the moment she arrived at base camp with a camera crew and a bad attitude, to the moment her frozen body became a permanent landmark on Kanchenjunga. We will look at the text messages she sent, the warnings she laughed off, and the desperate final attempts by the climbing community to stop her from committing suicide by summit. The recovery of Ingrid's body would eventually become one of the most controversial operations of the decade, sparking a debate that tore the climbing world apart. When a climber does everything in their power to die, is the community obligated to risk lives to bring them down? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning. The morning Pemba Jelj walked onto that ridge, the sun was just hitting the upper peaks, casting a blood-red glow over the snow. The storm that had raged for the previous 18 hours had finally broken, leaving the air aggressively clear and cold, minus 35 degrees Celsius. Pemba and his 2 other high-altitude porters had climbed through the night, risking frostbite and exhaustion, following a faint set of crampon tracks that deviated wildly from the fixed lines. When they reached her, the first thing they noticed was her pack. It was unzipped. Equipment was scattered across the snow: a water bottle frozen solid, a spare oxygen cylinder that had not been used, and her satellite phone. The phone was dead, the battery drained by the cold. But later, forensic analysis would reveal a draft message she had tried to send in her final moments. It was not a goodbye to her family. It was not a call for rescue. It was a justification. Even as she was freezing to death, Ingrid Larson was trying to explain why she was right and the mountain was wrong. This level of delusion is rare, even in a sport filled with big egos. Kanchenjunga is not Everest. There are no commercial conga lines here. It is steeper, colder, and more remote. It demands respect. Ingrid Larson treated it like a backdrop for her personal brand. She had arrived in Nepal with a sponsorship deal pending, a following of 200,000 people on Instagram, and a chip on her shoulder the size of a serac. She wanted to be the youngest woman from her country to summit the top 5 peaks without supplemental oxygen, a goal she had heavily publicized. But there was a problem. She was not climbing without oxygen because she was a purist. She was doing it because she believed using oxygen was cheating, a sign of weakness that she openly criticized in others. On the morning she was found, Pemba checked her regulator. She had one attached, a backup forced on her by the expedition leader she had fired. It was turned off. The tank was full. She had carried the weight of that life-saving gas all the way to 8,200 meters and refused to turn the valve, even as her brain began to swell and her blood thickened into sludge. She died with life strapped to her back because her ego would not let her flip a switch. Imagine the level of commitment to a false narrative required to choose death over admitting you need help. That is what we call summit fever weaponized. And if you think this is just one tragic anecdote, you are wrong. This mindset is spreading. Climbers are treating the death zone like a video game, convinced they can respawn if things go wrong. The reaction to her death was immediate and polarized. In mainstream media, she was painted as a brave adventurer, a young woman chasing her dreams who was taken too soon by a cruel mountain. But in the base camps of the Himalayas, the mood was different. There was anger. There was relief that she had not taken anyone else with her. One veteran expedition leader who asked to remain anonymous told us, "We spent 3 weeks terrified that we would have to die trying to save her. When we heard she went alone, it was cold to say, but we slept better. We knew it was over." To understand how a 29-year-old woman ends up frozen and alone at 8,200 meters, ignored by the very people paid to protect her, we have to go back 3 weeks. It was a slow-motion car crash that everyone saw coming. It started the moment she landed in Kathmandu. Most climbers spend days checking gear, meeting with their Sherpa team, and discussing strategy. Ingrid spent her time live-streaming from her hotel room, complaining about the inefficiency of local logistics. She posted a video ranting about her permit delay, calling Nepali officials bureaucratic dinosaurs who were trying to sabotage her record. That was a bad start, but it got worse when she met Tenzing Norbu, the lead Sherpa assigned to her team. Tenzing is a legend. He has summited Kanchenjunga 4 times. He knows the mountain's moods better than any meteorologist. When he inspected Ingrid's gear list, he noticed she had packed ultra-lightweight boots, models designed for 6,000-meter peaks, not 8,000-meter giants. They were lighter, which looked good for speed records, but they offered significantly less insulation. When Tenzing pointed this out, suggesting she rent proper triple-layer boots, Ingrid reportedly laughed. She told him, "I run hot. I don't need heavy clunkers slowing me down." Then she posted a photo of her light boots on Instagram with the caption, "Light and fast." The old guard doesn't get it. That caption is haunting now because when Pemba found her body, one of the first things he noted was the condition of her feet. Even through her gaiters, they were frozen solid like blocks of wood. The frostbite had likely started hours before she sat down. She had walked on dead feet for miles, driven by nothing but stubbornness, until she physically could not take another step. The old guard, she mocked, was not trying to slow her down. They were trying to ensure she walked back down. This pattern of dismissing expert advice was not an occasional lapse. It was her operating system. 10 days before the summit push, a heavy snowstorm dumped a meter of fresh powder on the route between Camp 2 and Camp 3. The avalanche risk was extreme. Every team on the mountain expeditions from Germany, Japan, and the United States agreed to hold at base camp for 3 days to let the snow settle. That is standard safety protocol. You do not climb on a loaded slope. Ingrid, however, was impatient. She had a flight to catch in 2 weeks for a TED Talk she was scheduled to give about overcoming obstacles. She went to the lead guide's tent and demanded they move. When they refused, citing avalanche danger, she threw a fit witnessed by nearly everyone in camp. She accused them of laziness. She accused them of trying to milk her for more money by extending the trip. And then she did something unforgivable in the high-altitude community. She questioned their courage. She told a room full of men who had spent their lives saving people like her that they were afraid of a little snow. If you are watching this and shaking your head, you are not alone. The arrogance is suffocating. But it is important to analyze this because it kills. It is not just rude, it is lethal. High-altitude mountaineering relies on trust. You have to trust your team and they have to trust you. By the time Ingrid Larson geared up for her final push, that trust was gone. She was climbing in a vacuum of her own making. No one wanted to climb with her. No one wanted to share a tent with her. She had isolated herself completely in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. And yet, despite all of this, despite the bad boots, the bad attitude, the alienation of her support team, she was still a strong climber physically. That is the tragedy. She had the lungs, she had the legs, she had the funding. If she had possessed even an ounce of humility, she would be alive today. She would be giving that TED Talk. Instead, she became a cautionary tale, a frozen statue that climbers now have to step around. The final warning came 48 hours before her death. Weather reports shifted. A jet stream dip was predicted to hit the summit ridge on the afternoon of May 14th. Winds were expected to jump from 30 kilometers per hour to 100 kilometers per hour in the span of an hour. That is what meteorologists call a hard window closure. Every team adjusted their plans. Most decided to scrub the summit bid entirely and head down. The season was effectively over. Ingrid looked at the same report and saw something different. She saw an opportunity. With everyone else leaving, she would have the mountain to herself. She told her camera crew, who refused to go higher than Camp 2, that meteorologists were always dramatic. She said, "I'll be up and down before the wind hits. Ich klim fast." Those were the words she used to justify ignoring a hurricane-force wind warning. Speed is a weapon in the mountains, yes, but you cannot outrun the atmosphere. To understand why Ingrid Larson was sitting alone on an icy ledge at 8,200 meters waiting to die, we have to understand the most dangerous drug in modern mountaineering. It is not adrenaline. It is not hypoxia. It is validation. Ingrid Larson was not born reckless. She was made reckless, a product of social media algorithms, sponsorship pressure, and the survivorship bias that convinces lucky people they are actually skilled. For 10 years, the mountains taught her the wrong lesson. Every time she rolled the dice and survived, she did not think, "I got lucky." She thought, "I was right." She grew up in Boulder, Colorado, in a family of high-achieving academics. She was not a climber initially. She was a gymnast, competitive, disciplined, used to pushing her body until it broke. When she transitioned to climbing in her early 20s, she brought that same intensity. She progressed faster than anyone thought was safe. Most climbers spend years on crags before tackling big alpine routes. Ingrid was doing glaciated peaks in the Andes within 18 months of putting on a harness. Her physical engine was undeniable. Her VO2 max was off the charts. She could suffer longer and harder than men with 10 years more experience. But in mountaineering, a big engine without a steering wheel is just a liability. The first major red flag, the moment that should have ended her career or saved her life, happened in 2018 on Aconcagua. It is a story that was scrubbed from her Instagram feed, but in the climbing bars of Mendoza, guides still talk about it. Ingrid was attempting the Polish glacier route. It was a guided expedition, but from day one she chafed against the rules. On summit day, the lead guide, a veteran named Carlos, called a turnaround at 2 p.m. The group was moving too slow, and clouds were gathering on the horizon. Everyone turned back. Everyone except Ingrid. She unclipped from the rope team and told Carlos, "I'm moving faster than you guys. I'll tag the top and ski down. I'll beat you to camp." Carlos tried to physically stop her, but at 6,500 meters you cannot wrestle someone. She turned and sprinted, literally sprinted up the final slope. She summited alone in a whiteout. On the descent, she got lost. She spent 6 hours wandering in circles on the glacier, hallucinating, with one glove missing. She stumbled into Camp 2 at midnight, hypothermic with frost nip on 3 fingers. Any rational climber would look at that experience and think, "I almost died because I was an idiot." Ingrid looked at it and thought, "I defied the guide and I succeeded." She spun the narrative on social media. The post did not mention getting lost or the frostnip. It featured a selfie of her battered face with the caption, "They told me to turn back. I told them to watch me. Sometimes you have to trust your gut over the experts." That post got 40,000 likes. It got her a verified checkmark. And crucially, it got her the attention of Apex Gear, the outdoor apparel company that would eventually fund her death trip to Kanchenjunga. The lesson was locked in: disobedience pays. Caution is for people who do not want it badly enough. This is the golden child syndrome of the death zone. Ingrid built a brand on being the disruptor. She was the anti-guide climber. Her entire persona was built on the idea that the mountaineering establishment was a boys' club designed to hold back strong women. And while there is truth to sexism in climbing, Ingrid weaponized that truth to shield herself from legitimate safety criticism. If a male guide told her to slow down, it was not because of acclimatization. It was because he was threatened by her speed. If a Sherpa told her to use oxygen, it was not to save her brain cells. It was because they did not think a girl could do it raw. By 2020, she was a full-blown influencer. She had a podcast called The Sharp End, where she interviewed other extreme athletes. Listening to the episodes now is chilling. In an episode titled Fear is a Liar, aired just 6 months before her death, she said, "People mistake safety for survival. Safety is staying in your tent. Survival is knowing you can handle whatever is outside. I don't believe in no-fall zones. I believe in don't-fall mindsets. If you accept that falling isn't an option, you won't fall." That sounds empowering on a commute to work. It sounds insane at 8,000 meters. The mountain does not care about your mindset. A serac does not check your confidence level before it collapses. But her followers ate it up. The comment section became her echo chamber. "You're an inspiration. Ignore the haters. Go where they say you can't." These were not just fans. They were enablers, cheering her off the cliff. And Ingrid was addicted to the applause. But there was a darker side to her motivation, one that was not public: money. Despite the flashy Instagram photos, Ingrid was broke. High-altitude mountaineering is incredibly expensive. A Kanchenjunga expedition costs upwards of $40,000. She was living gig to gig, sponsorship check to sponsorship check. We spoke to a former roommate of hers in Boulder who shared texts from early 2021. Ingrid was terrified of losing her contract with Apex Gear. The company had pivoted to a new marketing strategy focused on hardcore alpinism. They wanted records. They wanted firsts. A generic summit of Everest would not cut it anymore. Everyone summits Everest. Ingrid needed something sharper, edgier. That is where the no O's, no supplemental oxygen obsession came from. It was not about purity. It was about market differentiation. Climbing Kanchenjunga, the third highest and arguably one of the hardest 8,000-meter peaks, without oxygen would put her in an elite tier. It would secure the renewal contract. It would pay the rent. She was cornered. She had built a lifestyle she could not afford on a reputation she had not actually earned. And now she had to cash the check her ego had written. The preparation for Kanchenjunga revealed just how deep the rot had gone. Normally, a climber attempting a no-oxygen ascent on an 8,000-meter peak would spend months training specifically for hypoxia. They would do rotations on lower peaks. They would dial in their nutrition. Ingrid spent the month before her departure on a media tour, flying to New York, Los Angeles, and London, doing interviews, photo shoots, and podcast appearances. She was missing training sessions to edit vlogs. Her focus was not on the mountain. It was on the content about the mountain. Her climbing partner for this trip was supposed to be Mark Davies, a quiet, capable alpinist from Utah who had climbed with her before. Mark pulled out 3 weeks before the trip. At the time, Ingrid claimed it was a scheduling conflict. We now know the truth. Mark sent an email to the expedition logistics company that was leaked during the post-death investigation. It read, "I cannot climb with her. She is not training. She is showing up to ice climbs hung over from launch parties. She keeps talking about the shot she needs on the summit ridge, not the route conditions. She thinks she's invincible because she got away with the Aconcagua stunt. I'm not going to watch her die." Mark Davies saved his own life with that email. He saw what the sponsors did not. Ingrid was not a climber anymore. She was a content creator playing a climber. And on Kanchenjunga, that distinction is fatal. So Ingrid went alone. Well, not truly alone. She hired a logistics team and a Sherpa support crew. But she had no partner to check her, no peer to look her in the eye and say, "You're being crazy." She surrounded herself with employees. And in the power dynamic of Himalayan climbing, employees have a hard time telling the client no, especially a client who is famous, loud, and holding the purse strings. She arrived in Nepal in April 2021 feeling like a god. She posted a photo from the plane window of the Himalayas piercing the clouds. The caption read, "My playground. Time to silence the doubters once and for all." She was not going there to climb. She was going there to prove people wrong. That is the most dangerous motivation a human being can have. When you climb for revenge against your critics, you stop looking at the weather and start looking at the narrative. But the mountain has a way of stripping away the narrative. As she trekked into base camp, the cracks in her armor began to show immediately. The altitude hits everyone, but it hits the arrogant harder. She was struggling on the trek in, lagging behind the porters on simple passes. Instead of admitting she was undertrained, she blamed the food, blamed her lightweight boots, blamed a sinus infection. She refused to acknowledge that her body was rejecting the altitude because she had not respected the acclimatization process. She was taking Diamox altitude medication in secret, hiding the pills in her vitamin bottle while publicly posting about natural adaptation. This is a crucial detail. When she eventually died, the toxicology report would show high levels of acetazolamide, Diamox, in her system. She was medicating her way up the mountain while claiming to be a pure climber. It was a lie, and like all lies in the death zone, eventually the truth catches up. The first major fracture occurred on May 7th during the second rotation to Camp 2. The purpose of this rotation is critical. Climbers ascend to 6,400 meters, sleep there to trigger red blood cell production, then descend to recover. It is physically brutal but non-negotiable. If you do not do the work, your body will not survive the death zone. Ingrid was struggling. On the ascent to Camp 2, she lagged 3 hours behind the main group. Tenzing stayed back with her, patiently breaking trail and checking her pace. When they finally dragged into Camp 2 well after dark, Ingrid was exhausted, slurring her words slightly, a symptom of early cerebral edema or just extreme fatigue. The plan was to sleep there, spend the next day resting at altitude, and descend the following morning. But at 4 a.m., Ingrid woke Tenzing. She was packing. "We're going down," she said. Tenzing argued, "Mi Sahib, we need to stay. Your body needs the altitude trigger. If we go down now, the rotation is wasted." Ingrid snapped, "I can't sleep in this wind. It's annoying. I'll acclimatize better at base camp where I can actually eat." That is physiologically false. You do not acclimatize at base camp. You only recover. But Ingrid insisted. She forced the team to descend immediately, skipping the critical 24-hour soak at 6,400 meters. On the way down, she passed another team ascending, a group of German climbers led by Jürgen, a no-nonsense alpinist. Jürgen later wrote in his expedition log, "Past the American girl descending. She looked wrecked. I asked if she was aborting the trip. She laughed and said she was too strong for this slow pace. She is skipping the work. She is going to get someone killed." When Ingrid got back to base camp, she did not post about the failed rotation. She posted a photo of herself doing yoga on a rock with the caption, "Listen to your body. Rest days are part of the grind. Hashtag self-care, hashtag alpine life." She was lying to her audience, but worse, she was lying to her physiology. She had just cheated on her homework, and she was about to take the final exam. The tension exploded on May 10th, the day of the infamous mess tent incident. The expedition leader for the logistics company Ingrid had hired was a Western guide named Liam. He was the safety net, the one who monitored radios and weather. On the evening of May 10th, Liam called a mandatory briefing. The meteorologist reports from Switzerland had just come in. A massive cyclonic system was developing in the Bay of Bengal, pushing moisture north and colliding with the jet stream. The forecast was horrific, heavy snow starting May 13th, followed by hurricane-force winds on the 14th and 15th. Liam stood in front of a whiteboard and drew a red line through the dates May 1316. "The window is closed," he announced. "We are looking at -40 with wind chill of -60. No one summits in that. We wait for the 20th or we go home." The room nodded. It was disappointing, but it was math. You do not argue with math. Except for Ingrid. She stood up, her face flushed. "My contract expires on the 18th, she said. "I have a flight on the 19th. I can't wait." Liam looked at her, exhausted. "Ingrid, the mountain doesn't care about your contract. If you go up on the 14th, you will die." She shot back, "You're being conservative. I've seen the other models. The American model shows a lull on the morning of the 14th. Just a 6-hour gap. That's all I need." Liam laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "A 6-hour gap? You think you can thread a needle in the death zone with a 6-hour margin of error? That's suicide. I won't support it. My Sherpas won't support it. And then Ingrid dropped the hammer. She pulled out her satellite phone and laid it on the table. Then you're fired, she said. I hired you for logistics, not to be my nanny. I'm an independent climber. I'll pay Tenzing and Pemba double to come with me. I don't need your permission. The room went dead silent. Firing a base camp manager days before a summit push is unheard of. It is an act of total destabilization. Liam looked at Tenzing. Tenzing looked at the floor. Tenzing was in an impossible position. He needed the money. Sherpas rely on summit bonuses to feed their families for the year. And he had a cultural difficulty with directly refusing a paying client's demand, especially one offering double pay. Ingrid turned to him. Tenzing, are you with me or are you a coward like him? That word, coward, in the high Himalayas, where bravery is the currency of respect, is a nuclear option. Tenzing looked up, his eyes hard. I will go, he said quietly. But we take oxygen. We take backup tanks. And if I say turn around, we turn around. Fine, Ingrid said, waving her hand dismissively. Whatever makes you feel safe. She had won the argument, but she had lost her safety net. Liam packed his bags the next morning. Before he left, he walked over to Pemba Jelch. She's going to kill herself, Liam told him. Don't let Tenzing die with her. Keep the radio on. I'll be at the lower village listening. If she freezes, leave her. It was a cold instruction, but it was necessary. Liam knew that when a client goes rogue, the biggest danger is that the Sherpas will die trying to save a corpse. With Liam gone, the atmosphere at base camp shifted from tension to dread. Ingrid was now effectively the expedition leader of a one-woman show. She spent May 11th manic organizing gear. That is when the oxygen dispute resurfaced. Ingrid was climbing no O's. That was the brand, the selling point. But Tenzing, holding to his promise, insisted they carry emergency bottles. I'm not wearing a mask, Ingrid shouted from inside her tent. If I wear a mask in the summit photos, I lose $50,000. Do you understand that? Tenzing stood outside, patient but immovable. We carry them in the pack, Misahib, for emergency. If you break your leg, if you get edema, we do not use them for climbing, but we carry them. She eventually relented, but the compromise was toxic. She agreed to carry one bottle in her own pack, but she refused to hook up the regulator or the mask system. It was dead weight, 4 kilograms of steel that she resented with every step. She treated the life-saving device like a curse. The night before departure, May 12th, was haunting. Base camp was emptying out. The smart teams were descending to thicker air to wait out the storm. Ingrid was packing. Inside her tent, the bravado finally cracked, just for a moment. We know this because of the digital footprint she left behind. At 9:30 p.m., she sent a text message to her contact at Apex Gear, a marketing director named Sarah. Hey, heading up tomorrow. The weather looks tight, really tight. If I don't summit, does the contract roll over to next year? The response came 10 minutes later. We're really banking on this content for the Q3 launch. The No Limits campaign is built around you. Next year is a long way off. Let's just focus on crushing it now. You got this. 3 words. You got this. They pushed a terrified woman out of the safety of doubt and back into the firing line of performance. There was no rollover, no safety net. It was summit or bust. Ingrid replied, copy that. Crushing it. Then she opened Instagram and posted a photo of her gear laid out. Ice axes, crampons, and the yellow suit that would become her shroud. The caption read, "The herd is running away. The wolves are heading up. The storm is just noise. Focus is everything. See you on top." She turned off her phone. She did not want to see the comments or the messages from her mother begging her to be careful. She was locked in. At 2 a.m. on May 13th, Ingrid, Tenzing, and Pemba stepped out of base camp. The air was still deceptively calm. The stars were out. It looked perfect. But high above them, visible only as a faint blur against the moonlight, the summit ridge was already beginning to smoke with spindrift. The jet stream was arriving early. As they walked past the sleeping tents of the other expeditions, a light flickered on in the German camp. Jürgen, the climber she had mocked earlier, unzipped his door and watched them go. He did not wave. He did not wish them luck. He just watched the 3 headlamps bobbing into the darkness toward the icefall. He later told investigators that it looked like a funeral procession. They were walking so heavy, there was no joy in it. Tenzing looked like a man walking to the gallows. The march to Camp 1 and Camp 2 was brutal. Ingrid was slower than before. The lack of proper acclimatization was hammering her. She stopped every 20 steps, gasping. Her heart rate monitor, which was recovered later, showed spikes of 180 beats per minute just walking on flat snow. That is the heart rate of a sprint sustained for hours. Her heart was eating itself. By the time they reached Camp 3 on the afternoon of May 13th, the 6-hour window she had promised was already closing. The sky to the west had turned a bruised, ugly purple. The wind was picking up, snapping prayer flags with a sound like gunshots. Tenzing grabbed her arm outside the tent at Camp 3. "Look!" he yelled over the wind, pointing at the summit. A massive plume of snow was ripping off the top of Kanchenjunga. It looked like the mountain was on fire. The white wind had arrived. "Window is gone," Tenzing shouted. "We stay here or go down." "No summit." Ingrid pulled her arm away. Her eyes were glassy, her lips blue from hypoxia. She pulled down her buff. "It's just the outer band," she slurred. "It will pass. We stick to the schedule. We leave for Camp 4 in 4 hours. Tenzing looked at Pemba. They had a silent conversation that only Sherpas understand, the calculation of risk, duty, and the futility of arguing with a mad woman. They decided to go 1 camp higher, to Camp 4 at 7,700 meters. They hoped that once she got there and felt the full force of the wind, she would break. They hoped the mountain would scare her straight before it killed her. It was a miscalculation. The mountain did not scare Ingrid Larson, provoked her. They climbed into the death zone not as a team but as a hostage negotiation in motion. Tenzing and Pemba were climbing to save her. Ingrid was climbing to save her career, and the storm, indifferent to both, began to inhale them. Camp 4 on Kanchenjunga sits at 7,700 meters. At this altitude, the human body is effectively dying. Digestion stops. Capillaries in the eyes burst. The brain, starved of oxygen, begins to shut down non-essential functions like logic, empathy, and fear. It is not a place for negotiation. It is a place for survival. On the night of May 13th, inside a small, battered yellow north face tent, a negotiation was taking place that would determine Ingrid's fate. Outside, the wind had picked up to 80 kilometers per hour, a screaming, relentless force that hammered the nylon walls, creating a noise so loud that the occupants had to scream to be heard. The temperature inside the tent was minus 20 degrees Celsius. Outside, with wind chill, it was pushing minus 50. Inside, 3 people huddled in down suits. Tenzing and Pemba sat by the door, their headlamps illuminating the steam of their breath. They were fully geared up, oxygen masks hanging around their necks, radios clipped to their chests. Opposite them sat Ingrid. She was not wearing a mask. Her face was puffy, her eyes bloodshot and erratic. She was vibrating with a manic energy that Tenzing recognized immediately, and not adrenaline, but the early stage of high-altitude cerebral edema, swelling of the brain that mimics extreme intoxication. It was 10 p.m., the planned departure time for the summit push. "We do not go," Tenzing said. His voice was flat, final. He pointed at the shaking tent walls. "Listen to the wind. If we leave the tent, we lose fingers. Maybe we lose noses. Maybe we die. No summit tonight." Ingrid stared at him, blinking slowly. To her hypoxic brain, Tenzing was not a safety expert saving her life. He was an obstacle, the old guard trying to gatekeep her success. She checked her watch. "It's just gusting," she yelled back. "The forecast said it would drop at midnight. We have to go now to hit the window." "There is no window," Pemba shouted, losing his composure. "Look at the barometer." He held up his Sunto watch. The pressure was dropping like a stone. A drop that severe indicates a massive storm front arriving immediately. Ingrid laughed, a disturbing, high-pitched sound with no humor in it. "You guys are just lazy. You want to sleep. You want to collect the fee and go home. I know how this works." This accusation, calling elite mountaineers lazy while they sit in the death zone, is the hallmark of a client who has lost touch with reality. But Ingrid did not stop there. She reached for her pack and pulled out the oxygen regulator. "Fine," she said. I'll make it easy for you. You're fired again, officially. Go down. I don't need you slowing me down anyway. Tenzing grabbed her wrist as she tried to stand up. You cannot go alone. You do not know the route. The fixed lines are buried. You will walk off the face. Ingrid ripped her arm away with surprising strength. I have the GPS track. I have the route on my watch. I don't need a babysitter. This is the point of no return. In every disaster, there is a singular second where the outcome shifts from possible tragedy to inevitable death. This was it. Tenzing Norbu had a choice. He could physically restrain her, tackle her, tie her up, drag her down the mountain. It has been done before. But at 7,700 meters, wrestling a combative climber is incredibly dangerous. If the tent rips during the struggle, they all freeze. If she fights back and knocks a mask off, he could pass out. And there is the legal aspect. If he dragged her down and she survived, she would sue him, destroy his reputation, claim he assaulted her and ruined her record. In the modern world of commercial mountaineering, guides are paralyzed by the fear of litigation almost as much as the fear of death. So Tenzing let go. He sat back on his heels, his face a mask of resignation. If you go, he said, we will not follow. We will wait here for 24 hours. If you are not back, we go down. Don't wait up, Ingrid said. She zipped up her down suit, put on her headlamp, checked her GoPro, but did not check her oxygen or drink water. She grabbed her ice axe and crawled out of the tent into the screaming darkness. Tenzing and Pemba zipped the door shut behind her. They sat in the dark, listening to the crunch of her crampons fading into the roar of the wind. They did not speak. They knew what they had just done. They had just watched a ghost walk out of their tent. Outside, the reality of the mountain hit Ingrid instantly. The wind was not just gusting. It was a physical wall. It knocked her sideways within the first 10 meters. The spindrift, tiny particles of ice moving at hurricane speeds, sandblasted any exposed skin. She had to pull her goggles down tight, reducing her vision to a narrow tunnel. But in her mind, this was not a warning. It was a battle. She turned on her GoPro. The footage recovered later is terrifying to watch. Pitch black, just the circle of her headlamp illuminating swirling snow. You can hear her breathing, ragged, desperate gasps. And you can hear her talking to herself. Just wind, just noise. Push through. They said you couldn't. Show them. She was climbing on hate, on the fumes of her ego. The route from Camp 4 to the summit of Kanchenjunga is complex, requiring navigation of rock bands and mixed snowfields. Usually there are fixed ropes, nylon lines anchored to the mountain that climbers clip into for safety. But the storm had buried them. The yellow brick road was gone. Ingrid was alone in the dark at 8,000 meters with no line to follow. She had to rely on her GPS watch. But here is the fatal flaw of technology in the death zone. GPS tells you where you are horizontally, but it is terrible at telling you what is between you and the waypoint. Her watch said, summit 400 meters. It did not tell her that between her and the summit was a vertical rock step covered in verglas, thin ice. At 1 a.m., 3 hours into her climb, she hit the killer's corridor, the section the guides had warned about, a traverse beneath a massive hanging glacier. In the dark, she missed the turn. The route goes left around a rock buttress. Ingrid went straight. Why? Because going straight looked easier. It was a snow slope. Her hypoxic brain chose the path of least resistance. She wandered off the route and into a cul-de-sac of ice. This is where the oxygen issue became critical. Without supplemental oxygen, her body was generating almost no heat. Blood was shunting to her core to keep her heart beating, leaving her extremities to die. Her light and fast boots, which she had defended so arrogantly, were now failing. The cold seeped through the thin soles. Her toes were likely numb by 2 a.m. By 3 a.m., they were frozen, but she kept moving. This is the horror of the walking ghost phase. The body becomes a machine that keeps executing the last command it was given. Climb, climb, climb. Even as the mind disintegrates, the legs keep pumping. At 4:30 a.m., the sun began to rise. This should have been a moment of salvation. Sunlight brings warmth and visibility. But for Ingrid, the sunrise brought only the realization of her mistake. As light hit the face, she stopped. She looked around. She was not on the summit ridge. She was on a dead-end spur, 300 meters below and to the right of the summit. To get back to the route, she would have to downclimb precarious mixed rock and traverse back across an avalanche slope. She checked her watch. Altitude 8,200 meters. Time 5 a.m. She had been climbing for 7 hours and had gone the wrong way. Any rational climber, even an exhausted one, would have panicked, tried to retrace their steps, turned on the radio and screamed for help. Ingrid did not panic. She sat down. This behavior is typical of advanced hypothermia and hypoxia. It is called paradoxical calm. The brain, overwhelmed by stress, simply gives up. It decides that the struggle is over. She took off her pack and set it carefully in the snow next to her. She took out her water bottle frozen solid. She looked at it confused, as if she could not understand why water would turn to ice at -30. Then she did the thing that haunts everyone who sees the photos. She took off her gloves. Paradoxical undressing is a common phenomenon in freezing deaths. The nerves in the skin become confused as blood vessels dilate in a final desperate attempt to warm the skin. The victim feels a sudden intense wave of heat. They feel like they are burning up. Ingrid felt hot. She felt like she was back in Boulder lying in the sun. So she took off her heavy down mitts and placed them neatly on her lap. Then she pulled out her satellite phone. Her fingers were white, waxy, useless claws. She tried to type. The message log recovered later shows a series of incoherent letters. "Where are you guys? I'm waiting." She was waiting for the team she had fired. She was waiting for the people she had called cowards. In the end, the independence was a lie. She wanted Tenzing. She wanted someone to come and fix it. But Tenzing was 500 meters below, huddled in a tent being buried by snow, praying that she had turned around hours ago. At 6 a.m., Ingrid Larson made her final social media post. She did not have an internet connection to upload it, but she recorded it on her phone. The video is 10 seconds long. The camera shakes violently. The wind roars. Ingrid's face is unrecognizable, covered in frost, lips black, eyes wandering independently of each other. She pulls down her buff and tries to smile, but her facial muscles are frozen. "Summit, I think. Pretty sure," she whispers. Her voice is a rasp. "So beautiful. Told you I could." Then the phone slips from her hand and falls into the snow. The video ends. She did not summit. She was nowhere near the summit. She was dying on a ledge in the middle of nowhere, hallucinating a victory that never happened. She slumped back against the ice wall. Her heart rate, which had been racing for hours, began to slow. The body, realizing the battle was lost, began the final shutdown sequence. The shivering stopped. The pain faded. The gray fog of unconsciousness rolled in. Down at Camp 4, Tenzing and Pemba waited. The sun was up. The wind had dropped slightly, just enough to look outside. Tenzing unzipped the door and scanned the route with binoculars. He saw nothing, no movement on the ridge, no yellow suit descending the fixed lines. He picked up the radio. "Base camp, this is Camp 4. Do you copy?" "Copy, Camp 4. Go ahead." Ingrid is not back. She left at 2200 hours. No contact. There was a long silence. Then Liam's voice from the village below cut in. "Did she take the oxygen?" "She took the bottle," Tenzing said. "But she did not wear the mask." "Okay," Liam said. "Prepare for rescue. But Tenzing, do not kill yourself for a ghost. If she is not moving, she is gone." "Copy," Tenzing said. He put down the radio and looked at Pemba. They began to put on their crampons. They were exhausted, dehydrated, and terrified. But they were Sherpas. They do not leave people behind, even the ones who deserve it. They started climbing at 7 a.m. It would take them 4 hours to reach her, 4 hours of climbing past the invisible line where Ingrid Larson had made her choice. As they climbed, they saw the evidence of her struggle. A dropped energy gel wrapper, a single crampon mark on a rock, the erratic wandering footprints of a person who had lost their mind. At 9:30 a.m., they found her ice axe lying in the snow, not planted, just dropped. That is significant. An ice axe is a climber's lifeline. You do not drop it unless your brain has stopped registering danger. At 10:45 a.m., Pemba spotted her, a splash of yellow against the gray rock. She was sitting on a small ledge, legs dangling over the abyss. From a distance, she looked alive, sitting upright, head up. Hope is a dangerous thing. For a second, Tenzing thought. Maybe she is just resting. But as they got closer, the illusion shattered. She was not moving. The wind was buffeting her suit, making her arms sway slightly, but there was no voluntary motion. Her head was tilted back, face toward the sky. When they reached the ledge at 11:15 a.m., the reality of the scene was worse than death. It was peaceful. Ingrid looked like she was sleeping. Her eyes were closed. Her skin was waxy and white like marble. There was no rime ice on her face, which meant she had not been breathing for a while. The heat from her breath would have created an ice mask if she were alive. Tenzing knelt beside her, put a hand on her shoulder, and shook her. "Ingrid," he yelled. "Ingrid." She was solid, frozen through a block of ice inside a down suit. He checked for a pulse at the carotid artery, though he knew it was futile. Nothing. He put his ear to her chest. Silence. Pemba arrived a moment later, collapsing in the snow, hyperventilating. He looked at the body, then at Tenzing, and just shook his head. Tenzing reached for the oxygen bottle in her pack. He checked the gauge, full 3000 psi. He looked at the regulator, closed. He looked at her face, no mask. She had died of hypoxia and hypothermia while sitting on a life support system. She had carried the weight of her salvation all the way to her grave and refused to use it because of a hashtag. Tenzing keyed his radio. "Base camp, Tenzing." Static crackled. "Go ahead, Tenzing." Liam's voice was tense. "We are at the target. No pulse. No breathing. She is gone." Long time. A long pause. Then copy. Confirm identity. Confirmed. "It is Ingrid. Frozen solid." "Okay," Liam said, his voice heavy. "Document the scene. Take photos for the authorities. Then come down. Leave her. It is too dangerous to move her." "Copy." Tenzing pulled out his phone and took photos of the body, the regulator, the location, photos of her hands, the missing gloves, the white fingers. These would later be crucial to prove that the Sherpas were not negligent. While Tenzing documented the scene, Pemba found the GoPro on her chest and the phone in the snow. He put them in his pocket, the black boxes of the disaster. Then they did something traditional in the Himalayas. They covered her face. Tenzing pulled the hood of her down suit over her head and zipped it up as far as it would go. He could not close her eyes. They were already frozen shut. But he wanted to give her some dignity. He anchored her to the rock with a piece of cord so the wind would not blow her off the face. It was a makeshift burial. "Sorry, Mi Sahib," Tenzing whispered. "We tried." They turned and began the descent. The news spread instantly. Within minutes, texts were going out via satellite. "Ingrid Larson is dead." The reaction on social media was chaotic. Her last post, "See you on top," was flooded with comments. Prayers. Then, as the news was confirmed, grief. "Rest in power, Queen. She died doing what she loved." But at base camp, the mood was different. It was not grief, it was anger. Jürgen, the German climber, walked over to Liam's tent. "She killed herself," he said bluntly. "And she almost killed Tenzing. This is not a tragedy. This is a crime." Liam did not argue. He was already drafting the official report. He had to explain why a client was dead, why her guides were not with her, and why her body was being abandoned. It was a paperwork nightmare, but beneath the bureaucracy, Liam felt a deep, burning rage. He had tried. He had warned her, and she had fired him for it. The body remained on the mountain for weeks. Ingrid's family, devastated, demanded her return. They launched a GoFundMe campaign, "Bring Ingrid Home," raising $50,000 in 2 days. That put the Sherpa community in an impossible position. Retrieving a frozen body from 8,200 meters on Kanchenjunga is technically possible, but it requires a team of 6 to 8 elite climbers, thousands of meters of rope, and a perfect weather window. It risks the lives of everyone involved. A frozen body weighs 3 times as much as a living person, dead weight, unwieldy and stiff. Tenzing Norbu was asked if he would lead the recovery. He said, "No, I will not risk my life again for her. She chose to stay there. I choose to live." Eventually, a different commercial team took the contract. 2 weeks later, during a weather window, they went up. The recovery operation was a disaster in its own right. One Sherpa was hit by rockfall and broke his arm. Another got severe frostbite on his nose. They managed to lower Ingrid's body to Camp 2, where a helicopter long-lined her out. The footage of that yellow body bag swinging beneath the rotor blades against the backdrop of the mountain she had disrespected was broadcast around the world. It was meant to be a moment of closure. Instead, it was a grim spectacle. The autopsy confirmed what Tenzing suspected. Cause of death: high-altitude cerebral edema and hypothermia. The toxicology report showed the diamox and also dexamethasone, a powerful steroid used to reduce brain swelling, a rescue drug meant only for emergencies. Finding it in her system suggested she had taken a massive dose in her final hours, desperately trying to reboot her failing brain. It proved she knew she was in trouble long before she sat down to die. The investigation also turned toward Apex Gear. Internal emails surfaced showing a marketing executive writing, "We need something viral, Ingrid. The engagement numbers on the training posts are low. Can you spice up the summit push? Maybe a live stream from the top." A smoking gun, a marketing executive asking a climber to take risks for engagement metrics. The No Limits campaign was quietly scrubbed from the Apex Gear website. The climbing community fractured. One side saw Ingrid as a symptom of a disease, social media ruining the sport, encouraging incompetent people to attempt peaks they had no business on. The other side argued that criticizing a dead woman was misogynistic. But gravity does not have a gender bias. A male climber who fired his guides, ignored weather reports, and climbed into a storm would be called an idiot too. The final report from Nepal's Department of Tourism cleared the Sherpas of any wrongdoing. It stated that the deceased acted against the direct advice of her certified guides and terminated their employment prior to the summit push. The Sherpas acted within safety protocols by remaining at Camp 4. It was legal absolution, but it did not fix the trauma. Tenzing Norbu retired from guiding that year. He told a journalist, "I cannot watch them die anymore. They come with cameras and no respect. They pay me to carry their bags, but they do not pay me to save them from themselves." The legacy of the disaster was a new set of rules for Kanchenjunga, stricter vetting for independent climbers, requiring proof of prior 8,000-meter summits. It became known informally as the Larson Rule. But rules are just paper. You cannot regulate ego. As long as there are likes to be mined from the death zone, people will find a way to circumvent safety checks. For years have passed. The snow has long since covered the scar where her body lay. But in the climbing world, Ingred Larson is still there, a ghost story told in mess tents from Everest to K2, shorthand for what happens when you believe your own hype. Guides now use a phrase when a client refuses to turn around: "Don't pull a Larson." It is a cruel epitaph, but it saves lives. Ingrid Larson wanted to be immortal. She wanted to be a legend. And in a twisted way, she succeeded. She is a legend now, a cautionary one. Kanchenjunga does not care about Instagram. It does not care about sponsorships. It only cares about physics. Ingrid thought she could negotiate with gravity, charm the storm. She was wrong. And she paid the only price the mountain accepts. If there is a lesson here, it is not "don't climb." People will always climb. The lesson is about humility, understanding that you are small and the mountain is big. Turning around is not a failure. It is a skill. Survival is the only metric that matters. As you watch this, somewhere in the world a climber is packing their bags, checking their GoPro, drafting a caption about conquering a peak. Maybe they will see this video. Maybe they will remember Ingrid Larson. Maybe when the wind picks up and the guide says, "Turn around," they will listen. Or maybe they will not. And we will be back here next season, telling another story about another ghost who thought they were the exception. Thank you for watching. If you want more deep dives into the reality of mountaineering disasters, make sure you are subscribed. We do not just tell you what happened, we tell you why. Check your knots. Check your ego.